Jiddy Vardy, Chapter 5. Cutting off Bay Bank, her bare feet slapped paving slabs as she ran along the ginnels. She wanted to put as much space between her and Jonas as quickly as she could. Dodging through lines of drying fish hanging between cottages, she leaped across lobster pots left outside cottage doorways. Out of the corner of her eye she saw faces, blurred by her speed into pale smudges, and heard the odd shout trailing in her wake. She turned a corner, not far now. She charged into Sunny Place, and pushing open a door bent over, gasping to catch her breath. Two middle-aged women, wrapped heavily in thick shawls, sat by a crackling fire. "What's rush?" Mary, the shorter one, said, her Yorkshire accent scooping deep into the vowels. Jiddy touched her dimpled cheek where a cut, tinged with the beginning of a bruise, had begun to sting. "I hate Nellie Ashner," she said, and kicking the table leg, flopped into a chair. Mary rose slowly. "Now then," she said, "if you did as I told you, there'd be none of this nonsense." "It ain't nonsense. I were with Jonas when You shouldn't be with anyone, least of all up at farm." "You should be helping Mary," Rebecca said, drawing her green shawl closer around her shoulders. Jiddy glowered under her dark eyelashes. "We weren't at farm." She knew she was in the wrong, but she would never admit that. Mary needed her, and it made her look bad, but it was impossible to stay indoors when the moors and the tops beckoned, and she certainly didn't need Rebecca pointing that out. "She said I stink more than Alan mine." "Do I stink?" Jiddy said, sniffing her armpit. "I'm sure Nellie's not too sweet either," Mary said. "She said I'm darker than rabbit droppings. She said I should go back where I came from." "What does that mean? Where do I come from?" "Nellie Ashner's no room to cast any stones," said Rebecca. "You take no notice of her." "Rebecca's right," said Mary. "Nellie's got troubles of her own. From what I hear, her da's none too clever with the bottle. You should feel sorry for her more than anything." "I'll never feel sorry for her," said Jiddy. "She's a fusty lugs." "Jiddy, that's not kind." Jumping up, she threw her arms around Mary's waist. "Why can't I call you Ma'am? Do I look like your Mum?" Jiddy put her head back to look at Mary's grey hair and round grey eyes. "Yes," she said. Snatching the needle from Mary's hand, Rebecca stood up to stir the steaming pot on the fire. A coal spat. "Why doesn't anyone else in Robin Hood's Bay look like me?" Jiddy said. Mary peeled Jiddy's hands away. "Get out spoons," she said. "That table won't lay itself, and Thomas will be home soon demanding his tea." "Jonas says," began Jiddy, her eyes on Rebecca and the steam rising from the pot on the fire. "Jonas Chaplow may be a bright lad, but he don't know everything," said Rebecca. Jiddy sighed. "It's not fair, that's all." "You're too old for tantrums," Rebecca said. "Get out cuddly, like Mary's asked you, and think on the folk who have put food on this table." Rebecca's tone told Jiddy she'd better get on with it, so she pulled open the table drawer and grabbed spoons and forks. She didn't want to talk any more anyway. She wanted to be splashing about in the sea and jumping over waves and never having to smell fish guts and Nellie's hot breath. Mary put 4 mugs on the table and gave Jiddy a gentle shove. "Dab that cut with a bit of hot water and don't look at the table like that. Rebecca even is stopping for tea as well." "No, it's all right, Mary. You've got Thomas to feed." "If I've got a rabbit in pot, you're stopping," Mary said. The large pot of stew smelled good, and Jiddy realised she was famished. Of course Rebecca should eat with them. She was always round, and it would seem odd if she didn't. The heat from the flames made Jiddy's cheek begin to smart, and spitting on a cloth, Rebecca rubbed it, making Jiddy pull away. Elbowing Jiddy and Rebecca to the side, Mary looked closer at the simmering liquid. "Like the smell of my cooking, do you?" she said. "Surprised whole of Filingthorpe, never mind whole of Bay, hasn't smelled your rabbit stew," Jiddy said. She was beginning to feel better, with Rebecca bathing her cheek and the thought of a hot dinner. "This lass is so sharp she'll cut herself one day," said Rebecca. "Don't I know it?" said Mary. "Now lift up those plates. I hear our Lord and Master on steps." Jiddy laughed. and let Rebecca dab her cheek again. She loved it when Mary called Thomas that. She wanted to joke in the same way with Jonas when they grew up. Right on cue, Thomas came in, carrying the fishing bag and stick. "Wind is getting up," he said, leaning the stick behind the door. And before he could put down his bag, Jiddy leaped across the room, wrapping her skinny arms around his hips and leaving Rebecca with a hand mid-air. He looked pleased, even though he pushed Jiddy back so they could take off his bag. Now then, what's this?" "How do, Rebecca?" "Jiddy's been fighting with Nellie Ashner again," Rebecca said. Thomas took off his heavy jacket and hung it on the line of pegs, taking a small packet out of one of the pockets. "Hope you kept your thumbs out of your fists like I told you," he said. "Tom," said Mary, spooning the stew onto a plate. He winked at Jiddy. "She won't be able to do much sewing with broken thumbs if she doesn't. Is that rabbit?" "Don't tell Squire," said Rebecca. Jiddy walked slowly, careful not to spill any of the stew from the plate Mary gave her. "What's in packet?" she said. "Never you mind." Mary nodded to Thomas to put the packet away, and he gave it to Rebecca, who took it to the cupboard in the corner by the fireplace. Jiddy rushed to take another steaming plate. "What is it?" she said. "Is it for me?" "You know what happens to curious folk," said Mary. "Now eat your dinner before Thomas eats it for you." Jiddy put her plate down, pulling it close and eyeing Thomas as he sat down. He winked at her again. "You'll know soon enough about packets going from pockets to cupboards," he said. "Thomas, you'll have to learn sometime." 8 years old is not old enough," said Mary. "Rebecca, come and sit." "Old enough for what?" said Jiddy. "Eat." The stew smelled so good and Jiddy was so hungry she soon tucked in and didn't care that Mary gave Thomas that look across the table again. Nellie wouldn't be eating a rabbit stew like this. Didn't matter what Nellie called her. Nobody cooked as well as Mary, and she was the only one in the whole of Robin Hood's Bay who had 2 women who were running around after her. When she'd finished and cleared the table, she ran upstairs as fast as she could, hands and feet scrabbling the steps, slamming her door closed before scampering under the narrow bed. Lying still, she breathed hard. She loved the space under the bed. It was her sanctuary, and no one but she was allowed there, not even Jonas. Closing her eyes, hands on her full tummy, she breathed in the familiar smell of wood and the very faint scent of sea lingering on her clothes. The smell made her think of Jonas. He hadn't come after her, and it hurt that he hadn't. Why hadn't he? Because he likes the big girls better, she told herself, and rolled over, resting her head on her arms. Things were changing. She could feel it. She'd show them. She were changing too. She listened. Rebecca still hadn't gone home next door. Mary and Thomas and she would be talking around the fire for another hour or so. There was no point in talking to Jonas, she told herself. She wasn't going to see him anymore either. Not if he chose Nellie Ashner above her. She'd not help him with anything from now on. Not on the farm, not listening to his waffling on about that stupid tax, and definitely not teaching him how to swim. She loved swimming. She loved the sea. She was desperate to swim out and reach a point where her feet no longer touched the ground, drifting with the current. Next time, she decided, when she were alone and the beach empty, she would pull off her dress and petticoats and paddle herself out, one arm over the other, kicking hard until she could look at the distant shore and feel the pull of the ocean at her back. She'd still not swim out further than that, where currents were dangerous, but one day she would, when she were ready, whether Jonas knew how to swim or not. She shivered. Mary would kill her if she fell ill, so she crawled out from under the bed. Her skirt had dried stiff with pale swirls of salt, making pretty patterns all along the hem, and as she stood up, white grains fell